Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we step into a grand gilded hall, the air thick with the scent of roasted pheasant and the whispers of scandal. You're not just a passive observer tonight. You're here, a guest, a whisper among the rustling silks and clinking silver. You find yourself seated at a table, not of highest honour, but certainly high enough to witness the unfolding spectacle. The light from 1,000 flickering candles casts long, dancing shadows across the tapestries, their threads woven with heroic deeds that seem a stark contrast to the human drama about to play out. You can almost feel the heat radiating from the massive hearth, hear the low murmur of conversation that's part gossip, part desperate attempt to impress. It's a night of masks and manners, where every smile is a calculated risk and every dish might be more than it seems. You've heard the rumours, of course. Stories of a forbidden banquet, an entire court brought to its knees by an act of culinary defiance. It's a moment frozen in time, a historical footnote you're about to walk right into. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least the historical record will remember you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The initial courses arrive, a parade of culinary masterpieces so intricate they look like tiny works of art. A swan carved from ice, its neck bent elegantly over a tray of oysters dusted with what you're told is saffron. Tiny meat pies, no bigger than your thumb, filled with a sweet and savoury mixture of spiced lamb and raisins. You select one, the flaky pastry crumbling just so, and you notice the faint, almost floral aroma that hangs in the air around the dish. You can see the emperor, a man so draped in jewels and fine fabric, he seems less a person and more a walking treasury, laughing with a visiting dignitary. His laugh is a little too loud, his smile a little too wide. It's the kind of performance you see from people who know they're being watched, every move an echo of their power. The court around you buzzes with activity, a nervous energy beneath the veneer of politeness. You see a duke adjust his cravat for the 10th time, his eyes darting towards the doors. A duchess, whose powdered face is a masterpiece of artifice, subtly pushes a plate of roasted quail away from her. The air feels charged, like just before a storm breaks. There's a subtle tension that permeates the room, a collective holding of breath that belies the festive appearance. You take a sip of the mead, its sweetness cloying on your tongue. The jug is silver, ornate, and heavier than you expected. You're told it's infused with mountain honey and some rare local herbs. You watch as a servant, his face as blank as a fresh sheet of parchment, pause for the man next to you. This is the mainstream historical fact that historians will later obsess over. Court banquets of this era were not just about food, they were a complex display of power and alliances. Seating charts were a political minefield, and the quality of the food and the skill of the cooks were a direct reflection of the monarch's wealth and influence. A poor banquet could be seen as an act of weakness, an invitation for rivals to strike. And what a feast this is! A testament to the emperor's apparently boundless resources. Yet, something feels off. There is a strange, subtle taste in the back of your throat that you can't quite place, a hint of something bitter hiding beneath the sweet honey. You glance around, wondering if anyone else has noticed. The strange feeling in your mouth persists, a curiosity that nibbles at the edges of your contentment. And here we get to our quirky or fringe historical tidbit. Among the many peculiar customs of this court, it was a known practice to present dishes that were almost impossible to eat. For example, a whole peacock might be roasted, and then its feathers carefully reattached to make it look alive. A grand, beautiful spectacle that would then have to be deconstructed for consumption. This was less about gluttony and more about proving the skill of the kitchen staff and the sheer opulence of the court. It was a flexing of culinary muscle. But tonight, it feels less like a show and more like a distraction. The re-feathered peacock is here, of course, its tail a magnificent fan of iridescent green and blue. It sits on a silver platter, a centerpiece you can't help but stare at. So lifelike it feels like it might just strut away. A strange little thought crosses your mind. If they're willing to put in this much work for a dead bird, what are they hiding in the food? You notice that not a single person has yet tried to cut into it, as if everyone is waiting for someone else to make the first move, to break the beautiful illusion. Historians still argue whether this particular banquet was truly a show of opulence or an intentional act of deception from the very beginning. Was the lavish spread a genuine display of power, or was it a carefully crafted smokescreen to hide something far more sinister? Was the emperor himself aware of what was to come, or was he just as much a pawn as the rest of the court? You watch him now, a glint in his eye as he raises his goblet. He doesn't seem like a man about to die. He seems like a man who has just won. And yet there's that nagging, unsettling feeling in your stomach. It's not an ache of hunger, but a low-level anxiety. You see one of the court minstrels, a young man with a face like a frightened rabbit trying to catch his colleague's eye from across the room, a message of pure terror in his gaze. You follow his line of sight to the massive kitchen doors, where a figure stands half hidden in the shadows watching the room. This figure is the emperor's new chef, a man who arrived only a few months ago and has since become the talk of the court. His food is legendary, but so are the rumours that follow him. He looks like a ghost in the doorway, his white tunic a beacon in the gloom. He doesn't look like a man proud of his work. He looks like a man about to detonate a bomb, and you, my friend, are sitting right in the blast radius. You find your focus drawn back to the dishes, a meticulously orchestrated symphony of flavours and textures. A platter of small roasted game birds, quail and partridges to be precise, arrives next. Their skin a perfect golden brown, glistening with a mysterious glaze. The aroma is intoxicating, a mix of herbs and roasting meat that makes your mouth water despite the lingering unease. The man next to you, a minor noble whose name you can't recall, enthusiastically spears a quail with his fork. "Exquisite," he murmurs, his eyes half closed in pleasure. You, however, notice something else. A faint, almost imperceptible dust of what looks like powdered mica shimmering on the skin of the birds. It catches the candlelight, giving the dish an ethereal, otherworldly glow. It's a strange, almost unsettling choice for a garnish, more decorative than practical. A mainstream historical fact here is that medieval and Renaissance cooks were often as much alchemists as they were chefs. They would use exotic, non-food ingredients to create a spectacle. Gold leaf, for instance, was used to symbolize wealth and divinity, and was believed to have medicinal properties, even though it was, in a culinary sense, completely inert. You've seen that before, but this is different. This dust is not gold. It's too silvery, too fine, almost like powdered frost. You take a small, cautious bite of your own quail. The meat is tender, the spice is complex, but the subtle, bitter aftertaste is back. It's a taste you can't place. Something earthy and sharp like the smell of a forgotten cellar. You feel a sudden, tiny prickle on your tongue, a sensation you immediately dismiss as a stray bone fragment. But it happens again, a fleeting sting, and you see the noble next to you quickly take a large gulp of wine, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It's a curious little detail that speaks volumes. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, it was rumoured that some royal kitchens in the past would use ground pearl powder in certain dishes. Pearls were considered a sign of ultimate luxury and purity, and ingesting them was thought to promote longevity and beauty. Of course, the digestive system couldn't process them, so it was basically just eating tiny rocks, a fancy way of saying I'm rich enough to waste valuable things. This mica-like powder, however, seems even more absurd. What possible purpose could it serve? It feels less like a display of wealth, and more like a deliberate act of theatricality, a strange flourish that draws your attention away from the substance of the meal itself. Historians still argue whether the emperor's new chef was a true culinary genius or merely an illusionist playing with people's perceptions. Did he create food that was genuinely innovative and delicious, or did he simply rely on strange, unexpected elements to distract from a lack of true skill? The man's reputation was so outsized, so quickly built, that it seems almost too good to be true. You remember the whispers. He arrived from the Far East, a land of mystery and fabled spices. He came with no references, no prior employment record, just a sealed letter from a forgotten duke and an almost supernatural talent for creating dishes that were both beautiful and bewildering. His name was whispered with a mix of awe and fear. You watch as he moves through the shadows by the kitchen door again, a fleeting white shape. He's not watching the guests, he's watching the food. Not with pride, but with a kind of grim, detached observation, like a scientist monitoring an experiment. The mood in the hall is beginning to shift. The initial gaiety has been replaced by a quiet, subtle tension. People are talking less, eating more slowly, their eyes darting around the room, meeting yours for a brief shared moment of silent apprehension. You see a woman, her face a canvas of heavy makeup and a high-piled wig, discreetly press a napkin to her lips, her hand trembling slightly. A man across the table from you, a burly knight with a florid face, takes a piece of bread and meticulously wipes his plate clean before eating the bread itself, as if trying to cleanse the lingering flavour. You try to catch the eye of the royal physician, a kind-faced older man with a neatly trimmed grey beard, but he is deep in conversation with a court official, his back to you. You wish you could just get a nod, a sign that everything's okay, but you're on your own. You remember a joke he once told, about how his job was less about medicine and more about making sure the king's wine wasn't filled with arsenic. It seemed funny at the time. It doesn't now. The main course arrives, and it's a showstopper. A whole roasted boar, its head garlanded with herbs and flowers, is carried in on a massive wooden platter by 4 strong men. It's a magnificent beast, its skin crackling and dark. But it's not the boar that captures your attention. It's what's served alongside it. Small, elegant bowls of a dark, viscous sauce, a rich brown that seems almost black in the candlelight. It looks like it's been reduced for hours, thick and glistening. It's a gravy, but the smell is something else. It's not the savoury, meaty aroma you expect. It's a strangely sweet, almost floral scent, one you can't place, mixed with a deeper, more pungent odour that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. The noble next to you, who had been so eager moments ago, hesitates. "What is this?" he whispers to a servant who simply shrugs, his expression as blank as ever. This is the moment when the first real alarm bells start to go off in your mind. The subtle suspicions you've had are no longer subtle. The feeling in the air has changed from a low hum of unease to a rising crescendo of quiet fear. Everyone is looking at the bowls, at the dark sauce, as if it were a living thing. You watch as the Emperor's goblet is filled, not with wine, but with a dark liquid from a porcelain pitcher. The physician from before, who had been in conversation, now turns and looks at the Emperor with a flash of alarm in his eyes. He starts to move, but is stopped by another official, a younger man with a tight, nervous smile. They exchange a few quick, hushed words, and the physician steps back, his face a mask of disappointment and resignation. You realise something is terribly, terribly wrong. The subtle actions of those around you, the hesitation to eat, the way people are avoiding each other's gazes, are all a part of a silent, desperate dance. You feel a growing knot in your stomach. It's not just the food, it's the knowledge that something forbidden, something dangerous, has been introduced into this most intimate of settings. The sweet floral smell of that dark sauce is growing stronger now, filling the air, and for the first time you start to feel genuinely sick. It's not just in your mind anymore. You can feel it in your body, a low thrum of nausea that says, "Run." But where would you go? The doors are locked, the guards are posted, and the most dangerous place in the kingdom is suddenly this very room, this beautiful gilded cage. The feast, once a promise of luxury, now feels like a trap, and you, a humble observer, are caught right in the middle of it. As the main course is served, your attention is irrevocably drawn to the chef himself. He remains by the kitchen doors, a silent, almost spectral figure in his starched white tunic. He's a man who seems to exist outside the usual social hierarchy of the court. His name, you recall from the whispers, is Master Theron. His reputation precedes him, but not in the way one would expect. It's a reputation born of eccentricity and strange tales, not just of culinary brilliance. You can't help but stare, a kind of morbid fascination holding you in its grip. His face is a study in calm, a deep focus that is both unsettling and magnetic. You notice the way his hands, thin and long, are clasped behind his back, a posture of perfect stillness amidst the rising chaos. A mainstream historical fact. Cooks and chefs in royal courts were often treated as a peculiar class of their own, sometimes elevated to a high status for their specific skills, yet always seen as servants. They held immense power, a secret knowledge of poisons and potions, and were often the most feared and trusted members of a king's inner circle. They could make or break a monarch's health, reputation, and in some cases, their life. But Master Theron's story is stranger than most. The whispers say he was an orphan, taken in by a reclusive sage who taught him not just how to cook, but how to understand the very essence of ingredients, the way they interact, the hidden properties they possess. He came to court not seeking a position, but simply offering his services, a strange, confident quietness about him that the emperor, a man who valued spectacle above all else, found irresistible. You remember one of the stranger stories about him, a quirky or fringe tidbit that was told to you in hushed tones over a glass of wine. It was said that Master Theron once prepared a banquet for a minor lord using only ingredients found within a few miles of the castle. The lord was sceptical, but the feast was said to be the most delicious he had ever eaten. The final course was a simple custard, but as the lord ate it, he claimed he could taste not just the milk and eggs, but the faint mineral flavour of the very bedrock beneath his castle and the sweet loamy earth of its gardens. It was a kind of culinary synesthesia, a way of experiencing the land through your taste buds. The story was dismissed as a wild fabrication, but it stuck with you, a testament to the man's almost mystical connection to food. Now, as you look at him, you can't help but wonder what he has tasted in this place, and what he's decided to put on your plate. Historians still argue whether Master Theron's eccentricities were genuine genius, or a cleverly crafted persona designed to hide his true intentions. Was his calm demeanour a sign of a truly enlightened mind, or the chilling focus of a man on a mission? You watch as he shifts his weight, the movement almost imperceptible. He is a predator in a kitchen, a wolf in sheep's clothing, or perhaps something even more complex. His eyes, you can just make them out from this distance, are not cruel. They seem pained, resigned. This isn't a man who takes joy in his work, not tonight at least. This is a man who is completing a task. The air around him feels cold, a pocket of stillness in the swirling heat of the hall. He looks like a statue carved from bone, a chilling sentinel guarding the great secret of the night. You recall another story about him, one whispered by a servant girl who had worked in the kitchens. She claimed he never spoke, not a single word. He communicated only through a series of subtle hand gestures and a quiet, intense gaze. It's hard to imagine that a man so dedicated to creation could be so utterly silent. The dark sauce from the main course sits on your plate, its surface catching the light like a slick of oil. The smell is stronger now, the sweet and pungent notes warring for dominance. The night from before has taken a large spoonful of it, and you see his face blanch, a flash of something like horror in his eyes, before he quickly masks it with a tight, strained smile. You feel a wave of nausea, a low, churning sensation in your gut. You want to push the plate away, to scream for someone to stop, but the silence of the court is too strong. To make a scene would be an act of social suicide, a transgression far worse in this world than a little stomach upset. Besides, what would you even say? I think the food is poisoned because of the way the chef is standing. You'd be laughed out of the hall, or worse, thrown in the dungeons for disturbing the emperor's feast. A young serving girl, no older than 12, moves past your table, her face pale and drawn. She holds a large silver tray, and on it are tiny jewelled confections, so delicate they look like they'd shatter at the slightest touch. They're a kind of post-meal digestif, a final flourish. They're not for you, but for the emperor's table. You see a flash of movement, and the young man next to you, a clerk from the treasury, suddenly lunges forward, knocking the tray from the girl's hands. The tiny confections scatter across the marble floor, their brilliant colours looking like scattered jewels. The girl gasps. The emperor looks up, his smile vanishing, a flash of pure, cold rage in his eyes. The clerk is immediately seized by guards, his face a mask of terror. "Forgive me, your majesty," he cries, his voice a terrified squeak. I have a terrible cough. I was trying to get a drink of water. It's a lie so transparent it's almost comical." But you realise what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to save the confections. He was trying to warn everyone about them, to prevent the emperor from taking the final fatal course. The emperor's anger, however, is not focused on the ruined sweets. He's looking at the clerk with a kind of predatory amusement. "A cough, you say?" he says, his voice as smooth and dangerous as a drawn blade. "We cannot have a sick man at our feast. Take him away." The guards drag the protesting clerk out of the hall, his pleas swallowed by the sudden silence. The emperor turns back to his table, and a new tray of confections is brought out by a different older servant. The emperor takes one, pops it into his mouth, and smiles with a kind of chilling satisfaction. He's not just eating, he's making a point. He's telling everyone in this room that he is in control, that any attempt to disrupt this feast will be met with immediate and unforgiving punishment. He has no idea, of course, that he is eating a ticking clock, and the chef in the shadows, Master Theron, finally turns and begins to walk away, back into the kitchen, his task complete. The silence in the hall is no longer of respect, but of pure, unadulterated terror. The game has begun, and no one, not even the Emperor, can see the final board. You feel a tremor in the very foundation of your existence. You stare at the dark sauce on your plate, the strange smell now seeming to fill your nostrils completely. It's a smell you can't quite identify, a perplexing mix of sweetness and something deeply, profoundly unpleasant. The silence that fell after the clerk's removal is thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the low, crackling sounds from the fireplace. You see the noble next to you, who had eagerly sampled the quail, now staring at his plate with a kind of sickened fascination. He dips a small piece of bread into the sauce, not to eat it, but to poke at it, as if trying to understand its true nature. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval and Renaissance banquets often featured sauces and gravies with highly complex, sometimes bizarre, ingredient lists. They might combine sweet fruits and spices from the East with savoury meats and bitter herbs, a blend of flavours that would seem strange to our modern palate. This was a way to show off a court's access to exotic goods and the chef's skill in combining them. But what you are looking at is something else entirely. It has the colour of rich chocolate, but the smell of something earthy and wrong. You feel a prickle of recognition, a distant memory trying to surface. A story you once heard about a particular rare plant from the far reaches of the Emperor's domain. A plant with a beautiful, vibrant red flower and a deadly root. You remember the old herbalist describing it. A plant that was said to taste of sweetness and decay, a flavour that would hide its true nature until it was too late. This is a crucial, if terrifying, moment. And here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. There was a strange old superstition that the taste of certain poisons could be disguised not by another flavour, but by an overpowering scent. The logic was that your brain would become so consumed with trying to identify the aroma that it would overlook the flavour itself. It was an almost psychological trick, a way of lulling the victim into a false sense of security. The chef, Master Theron, may not have used this exact method, but the principle is similar. The sauce's scent is so complex, so contradictory, that your mind is trying to solve a puzzle rather than simply reacting to a threat. It's a genius, terrifying kind of culinary misdirection. The sweet, cloying note is a trap, a siren's song for your sense of smell. Historians still argue whether the forbidden ingredient was chosen for its symbolism or simply its effectiveness. Was it a deliberate reference to a dark chapter in the Emperor's history, or was it simply the most potent substance the chef could acquire? The whispered name of the plant comes to you now, Solanum mortiferum, the death shade. It grows in the Emperor's private royal gardens, a fact that was a source of dark humour among the court. The beautiful, delicate flowers were seen as a testament to the Emperor's ability to cultivate even the most deadly things. But its root, it was said, was an almost instant poison, a substance so potent that even the smallest amount could bring a man to his knees. The root had no smell, no taste, and its effect was said to be a kind of creeping paralysis, a slow, terrifying shutting down of the body while the mind remained perfectly lucid. But the sauce you're looking at now, it's not odourless. It has that scent, the one you can't place. Could it be that the chef, a master of his craft, found a way to not only neutralise the tastelessness of the poison, but to make it the very essence of the dish? You notice something else about the sauce. It is not just the consistency of a gravy, it is thick and almost syrupy. You watch a few of the more adventurous or perhaps more foolish guests scoop it onto their roasted boar. They eat it with an almost religious intensity, savouring the flavour as if it were the most delicious thing they have ever tasted. But then you see the look on their faces, the brief flicker of confusion, the quick gulp of wine, the tight-lipped smiles. They're tasting what you're smelling. They're experiencing the sweet and the pungent at the same time, and it's a contradiction their senses are struggling to process. You realise the chef has not just prepared food, he has prepared a sensory paradox, a final, cruel joke. Suddenly a woman at the Emperor's table, a distant cousin of the Queen, lets out a small, almost inaudible gasp. She raises a jewelled hand to her throat, her eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Her face, a moment ago a flawless canvas of white powder and rouge, begins to flush a deep, alarming red. She looks around the table, her eyes searching for help, but the Emperor is distracted, laughing at a joke told by a foreign dignitary, his back to her. The royal physician is still at his post, but he seems to be keeping his gaze downcast, avoiding eye contact with anyone, a silent witness to the unfolding tragedy. The woman's distress is not just a polite social faux pas. It is the first crack in the carefully maintained facade of the banquet. You see her mouth open as if to scream, but no sound comes out. Her hand drops from her throat and she slumps forward, her head landing with a soft thud on the tabletop. A nearby servant, seeing her fall, lets out a tiny squeak of fear, but no one else moves. They're all still, waiting, watching. The silence that follows is even more terrible than before. The Emperor, turning back from his conversation, finally notices the woman. His smile falters, then vanishes completely. He looks at her for a long moment, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes. Then, as if nothing has happened, he turns to a servant. "Clean that up," he says, his voice low and tight. He doesn't say "tentere." He says "clean that up." The word hangs in the air, cold and final, a testament to how little he values life, even that of his own kin. The servant, trembling, carefully takes a cloth and begins to wipe the table, but he does nothing to aid the fallen woman. She remains there, still as a doll, a macabre centerpiece to the feast. And in this moment, you know with a sickening certainty that the sauce is more than just a culinary curiosity. It is the forbidden feast itself, the final, fatal ingredient that will bring this entire court to its knees. The quiet, almost invisible acts of fear, the subtle smiles, the averted gazes, the frantic hand gestures, were all attempts to warn the unwarned. But the warning was a whisper, and the poison, a roar. And now, the roar is about to break free. You feel a cold chill that has nothing to do with the night air. It has to do with the knowledge that you have just seen the first domino fall, and now there's nothing to do but watch the rest of them tumble. You're watching the grim tableau at the Emperor's table, a dead woman slumped over a feast she never should have attended, when the memory comes flooding back. It's not a recent memory, but one from a few weeks prior, a conversation you had with the royal physician himself. His name was Master Elian, and he was known as much for his blunt honesty as for his medical skill. You had found him in the royal gardens, tending to a small secluded plot of medicinal herbs. He was a man who preferred the company of plants to people, and for a good reason, you now realise. A mainstream historical fact. Royal physicians were often an isolated and peculiar breed. They were privy to the most intimate secrets of the court, from the king's ill health to the queen's secret ailments. Their knowledge was both a source of power and a terrible burden. They were often tasked with discerning poisons, a skill that required as much political cunning as it did medical knowledge. Master Elian had a reputation for being incorruptible, a fact you now understand as his greatest vulnerability. You had been complaining about a mild stomachache, and he had given you some soothing tea. As you drank it, he had pointed to a plant in his garden. It was small and unassuming, with delicate, almost translucent leaves. "This," he had said, "is a plant that looks like a friend but is a terrible enemy." You had laughed, assuming it was a joke, but his face was serious. This is where the quirky or fringe tidbit comes in. He had explained that certain plants like this one could mimic the symptoms of common illnesses. It was a kind of botanical camouflage. He told you a story about a rival kingdom's monarch who was slowly poisoned over the course of a year. Every time a new symptom appeared, a cough, a headache, a bout of exhaustion, the royal doctors would attribute it to a new illness. The poison was so subtle, so cunningly administered, that the king was convinced he was simply getting old and sick. The royal physician of that court was disgraced for failing to save his monarch, but Elian was convinced the doctor was not a fool, but an unwitting dupe in a very clever long-term assassination plot. He had looked at you then, his eyes filled with a deep, sad knowledge. "The most dangerous poisons are not the ones that kill quickly," he had said. "They are the ones that kill so slowly, so perfectly, that no one even suspects they are there." Historians still argue whether Master Elian's foresight was due to a premonition, or if he had already begun to piece together the chef's sinister plan. Did he suspect Master Theron from the moment the new chef arrived, or was his warning a more general piece of advice, a reflection of the constant state of anxiety that a royal physician must live with. You think back to the specific words he used. He had talked about the death shade, the same plant whose name had come to you just moments ago. He had described its root, how it had no taste or smell in its raw form. But then he said something else, something that now seems absolutely chilling. It is a substance of pure nothingness, he had said. But its toxicity can be unlocked by introducing an overpowering taste and scent. A master alchemist could turn the nothing into a something, a deadly substance that has its own flavour and odour, so that the victim is not just poisoned, but tricked. You look at the dark sauce on your plate, at its sweet, cloying smell, at its deep, almost black colour. This is what he was talking about. This is the unlocking. The chef, Master Theron, is not just a cook. He is an alchemist, a man who has taken something undetectable and made it a centerpiece of a dish. He hasn't just killed, he has made a statement. The woman who just died at the Emperor's table, she was a victim not just of a poison, but of a kind of sick culinary artistry. You feel a new wave of nausea, one not from fear of the food, but from the horrifying realization of the depth of the chef's cunning. He has not just killed her, he has made her death a kind of macabre performance. The Emperor, seeing the woman's still form, finally begins to show a flicker of something other than anger. It looks like fear. He signals to the guards, not to clean it up this time, but to remove her. Two of them step forward and, with a kind of grim, practiced efficiency, lift the woman's limp body from her chair and carry her out of the hall. The foreign dignitary, who had been laughing just moments ago, now looks at his plate, his face ashen. He raises his goblet to his lips, then, with a shaking hand, sets it back down without drinking. The dominoes are falling and the sound is silent and terrible. You see the man next to you, the one who so enthusiastically ate the quail, quietly push his plate away, his hand trembling so violently he has to brace it with his other arm. His face is pale, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He catches your eye, and for the first time, you see a flash of real, unadulterated terror. He doesn't say anything, but the message is clear. He knows. He ate the sauce. He's already doomed. He takes a deep, shuddering breath, his chest heaving. It's a silent scream. You feel a pang of sympathy for him, a man who, just moments ago, was enjoying the finest feast of his life. He was a simple pawn in a much bigger game, and now he's paying the ultimate price. You turn your head, desperately trying to find Master Elian again. You see him, still standing at his post by the Emperor, but his face is now a mask of pure despair. He's not looking at the guests, he's looking at the Emperor, with a look that says, "I told you so." He seems to be arguing with the court official who stopped him before, his gestures more frantic, his whisper more urgent. The official, however, merely shakes his head, a look of grim resolve on his face. He's not a man who believes in omens or warnings. He believes in order and control, and to him, the death of one courtier is simply a sad but manageable inconvenience. He has no idea that this is just the beginning. The banquet is a bomb, and the first fuse has just been lit. You feel a low hum of anxiety in your bones, a sense of impending doom that is now more than just a thought. It is a physical sensation. You are trapped in a slow-motion disaster, a grand, beautiful ship that is now slowly and silently sinking. You are on the deck, watching the lights flicker out one by one, and you know there's nowhere to swim to. The silence in the hall after the removal of the woman's body is even more profound than before. It's no longer the silence of anticipation, but of dread. You can hear the low, crackling sounds of the fire and the faint drip of melting ice from a forgotten centerpiece. People are still, almost frozen in place. They are looking at their plates, at the dark sauce, as if it were a living thing, a serpent coiled in its bowl. A few of the more sensible guests, or perhaps just the most terrified, are carefully and subtly pushing their plates away. But for many it is too late. They have already eaten. You remember a mainstream historical fact. In many royal courts, etiquette was a matter of life and death. To refuse a dish offered by the monarch was not just an insult, but an act of defiance, a statement of distrust that could have severe consequences. To refuse to eat the main course at a state banquet, particularly one prepared by a chef with the Emperor's personal favour, was a risk few would dare to take. The social pressure is a kind of trap in itself. You see a young count who had just been boasting about his healthy appetite try to push his plate away, but he catches the eye of a stern-faced duke. The duke gives him a quick, sharp shake of the head, a silent warning. The count, his face pale, draws his plate back and takes a tiny, almost imperceptible bite of the roasted boar, carefully avoiding the sauce. It's a small act of defiance, a silent protest against the unspoken rule, but it's an act that might save his life. The disquiet in the room is growing into a palpable unease. You notice the man next to you, the one who had eaten so eagerly, is now fanning himself with his hand. His movements are quick and jerky, as if he is fighting to remain still. He takes another large gulp of wine, and this time you see his hand shaking so badly that some of the red liquid spills onto the white tablecloth, staining it like a drop of blood. He glances at you, his eyes wide, a silent plea for help. But what can you do? You're just as helpless as he is, a silent witness to a slow-motion catastrophe. Here is a quirky or fringe tidbit from the history of poisons. It was said that some ancient poisons were not just fatal, but also worked by causing psychological distress. They would induce feelings of paranoia, confusion and fear, making the victims believe they were losing their minds before their bodies gave out. This served a dual purpose. It was a cruel form of torture, and it made the death seem like the result of a sudden mental breakdown, not a calculated act of murder. As you watch the man next to you, you see a flash of that same psychological distress. He's not just physically sick, he's a man whose mind is beginning to unravel. He looks around the room, his eyes darting from face to face, as if he expects to see a conspirator in every shadow. Historians still argue whether the poison's effects were truly psychological or simply an extreme physical reaction to a potent toxin. Was the widespread panic that would soon ensue a direct result of the poison itself, or was it a chain reaction of fear and social conditioning? The man next to you is a perfect example of this debate. His physical symptoms are clear, the shaking hands, the beads of sweat on his forehead, but his psychological distress is even more pronounced. He looks at his own plate with a kind of sickened loathing, as if the food itself is a demon. You feel a pang of sympathy for him, for all of them. They are not just victims, they are subjects of a twisted experiment, and the results are about to become matter of public record. The man next to you suddenly lets out a small groan, a sound that is half muffled by the music from the minstrels, but which is loud enough to catch your attention. He clutches at his stomach, his face contorting in pain. A woman across the table sees him and lets out a tiny gasp, a hand flying to her mouth. The dominoes are beginning to fall faster now. Another man, a portly count who'd been eating with gusto, suddenly pushes his chair back from the table, his face a shocking shade of green. He looks like he's about to vomit. The two men are connected not by any social bond, but by a shared, terrible fate. They both ate the sauce. They both are dying. The Emperor, however, seems completely unbothered. He's still laughing with the foreign dignitary, a scene of bizarre normalcy in the midst of the growing disquiet. He seems oblivious to the unfolding disaster, or perhaps he's simply pretending to be. You remember the royal physician, Master Elian, and the desperate look on his face. He knows. He knew this would happen. He is a silent prophet of doom, a man who saw the end of the world coming and was powerless to stop it. He is still standing by the Emperor's side, a loyal watchdog whose bark has been silenced. His very presence is a terrible indictment of the Emperor's arrogance, of his refusal to listen to the people who knew best. A woman at the far end of the hall suddenly lets out a high-pitched, piercing scream. Her body is convulsing, her arms and legs spasming violently. A man next to her tries to catch her, but she falls to the floor, her body rigid and shaking. The scream, so sudden and so loud, is a crack in the dam of politeness and fear. It breaks the spell. People jump from their chairs, their faces a mixture of horror and confusion. The music from the minstrels grinds to a halt, the musicians looking at each other with wide, frightened eyes. The beautiful, orchestrated chaos of the banquet has given way to something far more real and far more terrifying. The Emperor finally looks up, his smile gone, a look of pure fury on his face. "Silence!" he roars, his voice echoing through the stunned hall. But it's too late. The dam has broken. The growing unease has given way to outright panic. The beautiful golden cage of the banquet has become a trap, a death sentence for all who ate. And you, my friend, are still there. A silent witness to a truly terrifying historical event. A forbidden feast that has now become a funeral pyre. The smell of the dark sauce seems to fill the entire room now. A sweet cloying aroma that is no longer a curiosity, but the scent of death itself. And you realise with a sick certainty that the true feast is not the one on the plates, but the one that the poison is having on the very souls of those who consumed it. The end is not just coming, it's already here. The piercing scream has shattered the illusion of order. The hall, a moment ago a picture of rigid etiquette, is now a scene of utter pandemonium. You watch as the man next to you, the one who so eagerly ate the quail, pushes his chair back with a terrible scraping noise and rises to his feet. His face is a sick, pale green, and his body is trembling, a silent internal earthquake. He looks toward the great gilded doors at the end of the hall, the only way out. He takes one halting step, then another, a desperate and futile attempt to escape the invisible cage. A mainstream historical fact. During times of social upheaval or panic, the instinct for self-preservation often overrides all sense of protocol. In times of plague or famine, people would abandon their posts, their families, and their responsibilities in a desperate effort to save themselves. The man's flight is a primal, human reaction, one that cuts through all the pretense and artifice of court life. It's the moment when the mask falls, and the true face of terror is revealed. He's not a noble or a courtier anymore. He's just a man who wants to live. He is a testament to the fact that all the finery in the world is no match for a simple, horrifying truth. You watch him as he stumbles forward, a living ghost in a room of the soon-to-be dead. His movement is clumsy, his knees buckling with every step. He looks like a puppet whose strings have been cut. He's a clear signal to everyone in the room. He's a signpost pointing to the truth, and it's a truth that no one wants to believe. You see a few people, inspired by his desperate courage, or maybe just his desperation, also begin to rise from their chairs, their eyes fixed on the doors. A young woman, a lady in waiting, lets out a small sob and turns to flee, but is held back by her mother, who clutches her arm with a vice-like grip, a look of grim resignation on her face. "We cannot," she whispers, a final terrible act of loyalty to a dying court. And here we come to a quirky or fringe tidbit. In the folklore of some ancient cultures, it was believed that the act of running from a curse or a poison was an act of magical surrender. It was thought that by acknowledging your fear and trying to escape, you were giving the evil permission to catch you, to ensnare you. The only way to survive was to stand still and face it, to show the curse you had no fear of it. The man who is now stumbling towards the door, then, is not just running from a physical threat. He is, in a way, giving in to a metaphysical one. His desperate flight is a physical manifestation of his surrender, his mind and body acknowledging the inevitable. Historians still argue whether the physical effects of the poison were so swift that they rendered escape impossible, or if the court's rigid social structure was the real prison. Did the man's body simply give out, or was it the social conditioning, the ingrained belief that one could not flee, that truly kept them all in place? You see the guards at the doors, two massive men in shining armour, their faces impassive. They are not moving to stop him. They are watching him with a kind of detached curiosity, like bored spectators at a grim play. Their lack of action is a chilling testament to the fact that they know this is not a social event gone wrong, but something else entirely. It's a purge. The man is now halfway to the doors. His face is contorted in a silent scream, his eyes wide with a terror that is almost unbearable to witness. He is shaking so violently that you can see his teeth chattering. He stretches a hand out towards the doors, his fingers twitching so close to the freedom he will never reach. And then, as if an invisible hand has pushed him, he stops. His body freezes and the tremors stop. He stands there, perfectly still, his outstretched arm a terrible, tragic monument to a lost cause. He remains like that for a full 5 seconds, a silent, macabre statue. Then, with a soft, audible thud, he falls forward, face first, to the marble floor. He does not move, he does not stir, he is dead. The thud of his body hitting the ground is the sound that finally truly breaks the hall. A woman screams again, but this time, it's not a piercing, shocked sound. It's a long, guttural wail of despair. A man collapses into his chair, his hands covering his face, his body racked with silent sobs. The Emperor, who had been watching the scene with a cold, detached amusement, now stands, his face a mask of furious disbelief. The game is no longer amusing to him. The social order has been irrevocably shattered. A few guests are now rising to their feet, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. They are not trying to escape, they are simply trying to get away from the tables, from the food, from the chairs that now feel like a terrible trap. The smell of the dark sauce now seems to be everywhere, a cloying, sickeningly sweet stench that hangs in the air like a shroud. You can see beads of sweat on the faces of the minstrels, who are now huddling together, their instruments forgotten. The guards at the doors finally move, but not to open them. They close them with a quiet final click of the latch. The sound is not loud, but it is a sound that echoes in the hearts of everyone in the room. It is the sound of a prison door closing. You're locked in, trapped with 100 other people, and the only thing you have in common is a shared terrible knowledge. You have all been invited to your own funeral, and the chef, Master Theron, is nowhere to be seen. He has done his work and gone, leaving a hall full of dead and dying people, a final, terrible legacy of his peculiar brand of culinary genius. And you, my friend, are still here, a silent, terrified witness. The feast is over, and the reckoning has begun. The hall is now a cacophony of sound and a swirl of motion. Shouts, wails, and the sickening thud of falling bodies punctuate the terrified murmur of the crowd. The Emperor, however, remains standing at his table, a solitary figure of fury in the centre of the storm. He has abandoned his pretense of calm. His face is no longer a mask of cold amusement, but a canvas of rage. He slams his fist onto the table, sending plates and goblets rattling. He roars again, this time with a voice that is pure, unadulterated command. Silence, I command you. Silence. A mainstream historical fact. Emperors and monarchs were often seen as divine or quasi-divine figures. Their word was law, their command absolute. In a world where a king's word could mean life or death, this final, terrible toast is a desperate attempt to reassert control, to impose order on a chaos that is entirely of his own making. The Emperor is clinging to a social structure that is now crumbling beneath his feet. He is a king on a sinking ship, still demanding that his subjects bow to him as they drown. It's a tragic, almost comical display of a man who has always gotten his way, now confronted with a reality he cannot command. You watch him as he grabs a large ornate goblet from his table. It is not filled with the dark liquid that so many others consumed. This one contains a clear, sparkling liquid, a private reserve of wine that only he and a select few others ever drank. He raises it high above his head, and the light from the 1,000 candles glints off the polished silver. He looks around the room, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of his courtiers, his gaze finally settling on the fallen body of the man who tried to flee. He smiles then, a cold, terrible smile that holds no warmth or humour. He is still playing his role, still trying to project an image of power, even as his world comes crashing down. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some royal historians believe that certain monarchs had a specific last stand protocol. This was not a military strategy, but a social one. If a monarch ever found themselves in a situation of utter social collapse, they were to perform one final grandiose act of dominance, a great speech, a dramatic gesture, to show the world that they died as they had lived, in control. It was a kind of performance art, a final act of a lifetime on a public stage. The Emperor's toast feels exactly like that. A terrible, final performance. He's not toasting to the good fortune of his court, but to its demise, and to his own perverse sense of victory. Historians still argue whether the Emperor's final toast was an act of genuine malice, a triumphant show of power, or a desperate final plea for respect. Did he know he was about to die, or did he believe he was immune to the poison? His private goblet, full of a different liquid, suggests he felt he was safe. But was he? You remember the story of the clerk, the one who was dragged away. He had warned the Emperor, or tried to, about the final course. But the Emperor had ignored him, had eaten the sweet offered to him from the new, unsullied tray. He was a man so consumed by his own arrogance that he couldn't see the trap until it was too late. He is now, in this moment, a victim of his own hubris. He raises his voice again, and a hush, born of shock and fear, falls over the room. "My friends," he bellows, his voice cracking with emotion that you can't quite decipher. let us not be so quick to lose our heads. This is a feast, a triumph of our court. Let us not let a few stomach ailments ruin it. He takes a long, slow sip from his goblet. His eyes are fixed on the crowd, a silent challenge in their depths. He wants them to see that he is unbothered, that he is fine, that all is well. But his face, in the flickering candlelight, is beginning to look strange. His skin seems to be growing pale, his eyes a little unfocused. The sweet that he ate, the final tiny piece of the forbidden feast, is doing its work. His words slur. To my kingdom, he says, his voice a little thicker now. To our future. He takes another sip, a long, desperate gulp, and then he stops. The goblet held high begins to tremble. The wine sloshes over the side. His eyes, once so commanding, are now wide and filled with a profound and terrible confusion. He looks around the room, as if trying to remember where he is. His lips move, but no sound comes out. He looks at his own hand, at the goblet he holds, as if they are foreign objects. He looks at Master Elian, the royal physician, who is now standing still as a statue, his face a perfect picture of sorrowful knowledge. The Emperor tries to speak, to say something, anything, but his jaw seems locked. A faint tremor runs through his body. He is not just dying. He's becoming a prisoner in his own skin, his mind perfectly lucid while his body shuts down. He tries to raise the goblet again, a last desperate act of defiance. But he can't. His arm, a moment ago so strong, now hangs limp by his side. The goblet, a symbol of his power and his final toast, falls from his hand and clatters to the floor, the sound of metal on marble a sharp, terrible finality. He stands there for a moment, a monarch who has just lost his kingdom and his life in a single, terrible meal. He looks at the dark sauce still on your plate, at the bodies of his courtiers, at the terrified faces of the survivors, and he seems to finally understand the depth of his folly. Then, with a slow, agonizing groan, he falls to his knees, his silk robes pooling around him like a shroud. He looks like a man bowing to a god he just realized exists, and then he falls face down, his body a silent, final testament to the poison's terrible efficiency. The Emperor is dead, and with his death, the last shred of order, the last thread of hope, has been severed. The true chaos can now begin. The fall of the Emperor is not a moment of quiet reverence, but the signal for utter, unadulterated chaos to break loose. The hall, a gilded cage just moments ago, has become a fighting pit of terrified people. The rigid social order held together by a lifetime of etiquette and fear has completely dissolved. The silence that followed the Emperor's final breath is shattered by a chorus of panicked screams. People are now scrambling over chairs and tables trying to get away from the food, from the scene of death, from each other. They're like rats in a burning building, a single, terrifying mass of humanity. A mainstream historical fact, the collapse of a monarchy, especially a sudden and violent one, often leads to a brief but intense period of social breakdown. The chain of command is severed, and for a short time, all of the rules and laws that governed society simply cease to exist. People who were once respectful nobles and dutiful courtiers are now just desperate human beings, fighting for their lives. The fear of the poison is a great equalizer. It doesn't care about your title, your wealth, or your station. It's a shared, terrible fate, and it has reduced the proudest court in the land to a squabbling, terrified mob. You see a duke, a man who once looked down on you with disdain, trip over a fallen body and crawl on his hands and knees, his silk robes dragging through a puddle of spilled wine. A duchess, a woman known for her icy demeanour, is sobbing uncontrollably, her perfect makeup smeared with tears and sweat. The minstrels, once providing the soundtrack to the feast, are now cowering behind their instruments, their faces ashen. They're just as trapped as everyone else, their only crime being their proximity to power. It's a terrifying reversal of fortune, a social hierarchy turned completely upside down. And here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. There was a medieval belief that the souls of the unburied dead would linger and cause misfortune for the living. The more violent the death, the more malevolent the spirit. As the bodies of the poisoned courtiers begin to pile up, you can almost feel the presence of their terrified, lingering spirits. The air seems to grow colder, thicker with a kind of miasma of fear and death. The panic in the hall is not just a reaction to the living, but to the dead as well. The living are not just trying to escape the poison, they're trying to get away from the spectral echo of their own fate. It's a kind of psychological feedback loop, where the fear of death makes the presence of death seem even more terrifying. The fallen are not just a warning, they're a kind of haunting. Historians still argue whether the Emperor's sudden death was the primary catalyst for the widespread chaos, or if the panic was already a pre-existing condition, simply waiting for the final push. Did the sight of a dead monarch truly break the spell of order, or was the court already so filled with suspicion and fear that it was always on the verge of collapse? The answer seems to be both. The poison was the means, but the social anxiety was the kindling. The Emperor's death was the spark that set the whole thing alight. It was the final, undeniable proof that no one was safe, not even the most powerful man in the kingdom. You see Master Elion, the royal physician, now at the heart of the chaos. He's kneeling next to the fallen Emperor, his hands moving quickly, checking for a pulse, a breath, a futile gesture, but one born of his training. He looks up then, his eyes catching yours across the room. There's no accusation in his gaze, only a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He is a man who saw this coming, who tried to warn them all, and who now has to witness the terrible consequences of his failed prophecy. He is the last sane man in a room full of lunatics, and his sanity is a terrible burden. He stands and begins to shout, not in panic, but in command. Do not drink. Do not eat. The food is cursed. Cursed. But his words are lost in the noise, a single, sane voice in a deafening scream. The guards, who had been standing impassively by the doors, are now completely overwhelmed. People are rushing them, clawing at them, trying to break through the doors. The guards are trained for battle, not for a stampede of terrified nobles. They're trying to hold the line, to maintain order, but their expressions are beginning to crack. A few of them have even turned and are looking at each other, a silent question in their eyes. Do we stay, or do we flee? Their loyalty is to the Emperor, but the Emperor is dead. Their purpose is gone. They are just men in armour, and the truth of the poison is more powerful than any chain of command. You watch as a young page, no older than 15, suddenly falls to his knees, his face contorted in pain. He had been so busy clearing plates and attending to guests that you had forgotten about him. He was not a noble, but he was here, and he ate the same food, or at least some of it, as everyone else. His death is a kind of terrible democracy. The poison does not discriminate. It is a classless, equal opportunity killer. The beautiful, elaborate banquet was not just a symbol of the court's power, it was a symbol of its own self-destruction, and you are a guest at its grand finale. The great hall is now a scene of utter destruction. Overturned tables, spilled wine, and scattered food are everywhere. The beautiful tapestries which once depicted heroic scenes are now a backdrop to a scene of abject human misery. The air, once thick with the smell of roasted meat and sweet spices, now has a coppery, sickening odour, the smell of fear and sickness. The feast has become a funeral, and the guests, the living and the dead, are all part of the same macabre ceremony. And the ghost of the peculiar chef, Master Theron, seems to be in every shadow, a silent, knowing presence, the author of this final, terrible chapter in the history of the court. The feast is over, the reckoning is here, and you are still breathing. For now. The sun, a tired, watery orb, finally begins to rise, its first weak rays of light filtering through the high windows of the great hall. It reveals a scene of utter, heartbreaking devastation. The once gilded room is now a tomb. The beautiful sparkling goblets and silver platters are scattered across the floor, mixed in with the limp, lifeless bodies of courtiers and servants. The smell is no longer one of feast and spice, but of sickness and death. A cloying, coppery scent that makes you want to gag. You're still breathing, one of a handful of survivors, a silent, shaken witness to a historical event that has, in a single night, changed the course of a kingdom. A mainstream historical fact. The immediate aftermath of a mass poisoning in a royal court was often as chaotic as the event itself. With the monarch dead and a significant portion of the nobility gone, there was a power vacuum. The first priority for any survivors with a lick of sense was to secure the throne and establish a new order. But for a few hours there was only confusion and fear. People were too terrified to do anything but sit and wait for the inevitable, for the poison to claim them too, or for some new threat to emerge from the chaos. The first few hours of a new day are often the most telling, and this one is a study in silence and stillness. You notice that not all the dead are nobles. The young page, a few servants, even a scullery maid who must have snuck a taste of the food. They are all here, lying on the floor, their faces a final, terrible testament to the indiscriminate nature of the poison. It is a mass grave of a kind, a final, terrible equality that no one in this court would have ever believed possible. The social hierarchy has been flattened, not by a revolution, but by a meal. And you, a minor guest, a nobody in the grand scheme of things, have survived. You are an anomaly, a tiny flicker of life in a hall full of death. Here is a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some ancient cultures, it was believed that if a meal was the site of a mass death, the ghosts of the victims would forever be bound to that place. The hall would be forever cursed, its silence broken only by the echoes of screams and the clatter of dropped silver. This hall, in the cold, grey light of dawn, feels just like that. It feels haunted. You can almost hear the echoes of the chaos from just a few hours ago, the shouts and screams and sobs, all of them a kind of ghostly soundbite playing in your mind. The lingering horror is not just in the sight of the bodies, but in the feeling that this place has been tainted forever. Historians still argue whether the lack of immediate action in the morning was due to shock or a calculated act of survival. Did the survivors remain in the hall because they were too terrified to leave, or were they waiting for a sign, for a new leader to emerge and tell them what to do? You are one of the survivors, so you know the answer is a bit of both. Your body is filled with a low-level anxiety, a kind of buzzing terror that tells you to run, but your mind is frozen, unable to comprehend the full scope of what has happened. You are a historical witness, and the first act of being a witness is simply to absorb the terrible reality. You cannot run from a truth that is now a part of you. The mystery, the lingering question that hangs in the air, is the disappearance of Master Theron, the peculiar chef. He is nowhere to be found. The kitchen doors are locked from the outside, but you remember seeing him disappear back into the kitchen. The guards you saw before, the two who had shut the doors, are now lying dead on the floor near the entrance, their armour now a cold metallic coffin. It seems the chef had a plan for them too. The poison was not just for the guests, it was for the entire court, from the emperor on his throne to the guards at the door. It was a complete act of annihilation, a final, terrible revenge. But why? What was his motive? What could possibly lead a man to commit such a monstrous act? The why, the motive, is a mystery that is as chilling as the sight of the dead. The morning light reveals a single, small object on the emperor's empty throne. It is a small carved wooden figurine, a replica of a bird you've never seen before. It looks like a simple token, a kind of souvenir from a far-off land, but it feels more sinister than that. It is a statement, a final, silent message from the chef to the emperor he has just killed. It's an act of defiance, a taunt from the shadows. You feel a new wave of fear. The chef is not just a monster, he is a meticulous, calculating genius. He's a man who not only planned a mass murder but a great theatrical flourish to accompany it. The mystery of the figurine, its meaning, is the final chilling touch to the entire affair. As the sun rises higher, the first sounds from outside begin to filter into the hall. The low rumble of a cart, the distant barking of a dog, the familiar sounds of a world that is completely unaware of the catastrophe that has just unfolded within these walls. You know that soon the doors will be breached. The guards, the royal family and the common people will discover the truth. The story of the forbidden feast that poisoned an entire royal court will begin to spread. And you, my friend, will be one of the few who can tell it, a living footnote in a history that has just been written in blood. The silence of the morning is the final heavy breath before a world-altering scream, and you are here to hear it all. The morning progresses, and with it, the dreadful, horrifying stillness in the great hall gives way to the inevitable. The doors are finally breached by a few brave, or perhaps foolhardy, royal guards who had been stationed in the outer courtyard. They are met with the sight of a nightmare. The silent, terrified survivors, the rows of motionless bodies, the overturned tables. It is a tableau of complete and total destruction. The guards, with their years of training, are unequipped to handle such a sight. They stare, their faces pale and their armour now a cold, metallic shell for their fear. A mainstream historical fact. In the absence of a clear air and a functioning government, the first order of business in a royal tragedy was to secure the site and to begin an investigation. This was less about justice and more about maintaining control. They needed to find out who had done this and why, and to make sure that the power vacuum did not lead to a full-blown civil war. The guards who entered the hall are not just soldiers, they are the first investigators, the first responders to a crime scene that is also a national tragedy. You watch as they begin to move, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they are walking on sacred cursed ground. They carefully step over the bodies, their eyes darting from the fallen emperor to the small carved figurine on the throne. They are looking for clues, for anything that can tell them what happened here, and you, a silent survivor, are a living, breathing clue. You see one of them, a grizzled old veteran with a scar across his face, look at you, his eyes filled with a kind of confused suspicion. He is wondering why you lived, and so are you. The question of your survival is as important as the question of the chef's disappearance. And here we come to a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some ancient cultures, it was believed that a killer could be found not by following their tracks, but by following their echo. It was said that a person's life and intentions left an energetic echo in a place where they committed a major act. The veteran guard with his ancient scar-etched face seems to be doing just that. He is not just looking for a physical trail. He is looking for a feeling, a sign, a supernatural clue to the whereabouts of the man who did this. He is looking for the echo of the chef, Master Theron, a ghost in the machine of the royal tragedy. Historians still argue whether the investigation that followed was a true pursuit of justice or a desperate attempt to find a scapegoat and re-establish order. Was the focus on the chef, Master Theron, a genuine attempt to find the perpetrator, or was it simply convenient? After all, he was a new, strange figure in the court, an easy villain. The guards' pursuit feels both like a genuine manhunt and a kind of performative act. They are searching for a man who is a symbol of chaos, a living embodiment of the court's ultimate downfall. The veteran guard, the one who looked at you, is now walking towards the kitchen doors. He's not approaching them with caution, but with a kind of grim, determined purpose. He must have seen the dead guards near the entrance, and he knows that the chef is the most logical suspect. He finds the locked door, the one you remember the chef disappearing behind, and he signals to his men. They break the door down with a single, resounding crash, and the sound echoes through the silent hall like a gunshot. The sound is a kind of terrible finality, the beginning of the end of the mystery. They enter the kitchen, their weapons drawn, and you hear their hushed, surprised whispers. They are not met with the sight of a struggle, or a mess. The kitchen is impeccably clean, as if a great feast had just been prepared and cleaned up without a single speck of dust or dirt. The ovens are cold, the pots and pans are stacked neatly. The kitchen is a testament to the chef's obsessive attention to detail. It is an empty stage, but it contains a clue. On a small wooden table in the centre of the room is a single, leather-bound journal. It's not a chef's cookbook. It is a personal journal, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. It is a confessional, a final act of theatricality from a man who knew he would not be around to face the consequences. The veteran guard picks up the journal, his movements careful and reverent, as if he's touching a sacred artifact. He opens it, and his eyes widen as he begins to read. You see him look up, his gaze sweeping over the scene of destruction in the Great Hall. He looks at the dead emperor, at the fallen nobles, and then he looks back down at the journal, as if what he is reading is so unbelievable that he has to see the evidence to believe it. He closes the journal, clutches it to his chest, and turns to his men, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. They don't have to ask what he's found. They can see it in his face. The why is in that book, and the truth, you know, will be more terrible than the death itself. The search for the missing chef has come to an end, not with a capture, but with a confession, a final, terrible legacy from a man who saw his life's purpose in a single, perfectly prepared meal. And you, a silent witness, are about to hear the final, chilling answer. The veteran guard, the one with the scar across his face, now stands in the centre of the great hall, the leather-bound journal clutched in his hand. The survivors, a small and terrified group, have gathered around him, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound relief. The chaos is over, But a new terrible order is about to be established, the order of truth. The journal is a silent but powerful speaker. He doesn't read it aloud, not at first. He simply holds it, his eyes scanning the elegant, precise handwriting. And as he reads, you can see the story of a lifetime of betrayal and sorrow unfolding on his face. A story far more compelling and chilling than the feast itself. A mainstream historical fact. Journals and personal documents are often the most valuable sources of historical information, offering a window into the minds of people who shaped events. They are unfiltered, raw, and often full of secrets that would never have been made public. Master Theron's journal is just such a document. It is not just a confession of a crime, but a personal history, a testament to a man who lived his life in the shadows and emerged only for this single, terrible act of revenge. It's a document that will redefine the history of this court, a new gospel written in ink and fury. The veteran guard looks up from the journal, his eyes catching yours again. He walks towards you, his face a mask of dawning understanding. He hands you the journal, a silent command. He wants you to read it too, to understand. You take it, the leather cool and smooth beneath your fingers. The first page is an introduction, a kind of prologue. It begins with a quote you don't recognize, a kind of dark poetry. The first taste of a beautiful poison is a memory, but the last taste is a legacy. The pages are filled with a meticulously written script, not a single smudge or a single mistake. The man who wrote this was a perfectionist, in his cooking and in his plotting. The story begins, not with the Emperor, but with a woman, a beautiful young herbalist, a commoner, a woman Master Theron loved. She was not of the court, but she was loved by a man in the court. And here's a quirky or fringe tidbit from the annals of court history. It was whispered that a royal court was not just a political entity, but a living, breathing creature with a mind of its own. It had its own desires, its own grudges, its own memory. It would reject and destroy anyone who did not fit, anyone who was an outsider. The herbalist, a commoner, was an outsider. Her love for a man in the court, a man who would one day become powerful, was an unforgivable sin against the creature of the court. She was not just a person, she was a threat to the social order. Her fate, you realise as you read, was sealed not by an act of malice, but by the simple, cruel logic of the court itself. Historians still argue whether the court was truly a living entity, as the folklore suggests, or if the court's cruel logic was simply a manifestation of the cold, unfeeling ambitions of the people who inhabited it. Was the destruction of the herbalist an act of personal spite, or was it a simple, brutal consequence of a system that could not tolerate an anomaly? The journal seems to suggest the latter. Master Theron doesn't write about personal grudges. He writes about a system, a cruel, uncaring machine that chewed up and spat out anyone who wasn't part of it. His vengeance is not against an individual, but against a system. You turn the page, and the story becomes more clear. The herbalist was loved by a young, ambitious noble. He was not a prince, but a count, a man who had great promise and a great future. He promised to marry her, to bring her into the court, to protect her. But the court, you read, had other ideas. The count's family was under pressure. The emperor himself had an interest in the count's alliance with a powerful duke, an alliance that would be sealed with a marriage to the duke's sister. The emperor himself gave the count an ultimatum: give up the herbalist, or give up your future. The count, a man with great ambition and not so great a character, chose the latter. He betrayed her, leaving her to face the wrath of a court that despised her. The journal describes the final terrible act of betrayal. The herbalist was poisoned, not with a quick-acting venom, but with a slow, agonizing poison, a substance that would take days to kill her, leaving her in a constant state of pain and suffering. This was not a quick, brutal murder. It was a kind of slow, terrible torture, a final message from the court: you do not belong. Master Theron, then a young apprentice, found her, but it was too late. He held her in his arms as she died, and he vowed then and there to get his revenge, not on the count who betrayed her, but on the emperor who commanded it. His vengeance was a long game, a slow, methodical process that would culminate in this single, terrible night. The journal then talks about his journey. He travelled the world, learning not just how to cook, but how to understand poisons, how to use them, how to hide them. He learned from the most brilliant minds, the most reclusive sages, the most dangerous alchemists. He was a man with a single, terrible purpose, and everything in his life, every dish he prepared, every flavour he learned, was a step towards that single, terrible night. He came to court not for a job, but for a stage. He was the most brilliant chef the Emperor had ever seen, and the Emperor, in his vanity, had no idea that he was bringing a living, breathing weapon into his own home. He was building his own gallows, and Master Theron was the carpenter. The journal ends with a final, chilling sentence. "I did not just bring you death, Your Majesty. I brought you the truth. You ate the poison of your own making." You close the journal, your hands trembling. The story in the book is more horrifying than the sight of the bodies on the floor. It is a story of a long, cold and calculated revenge, a slow-burning fire that finally erupted in a single, terrible conflagration. The feast was not just a meal. It was a final, terrible act of justice from a man who had lost everything to the cruel logic of the court. And the answer to the mystery of the poison is now clear. The poison was not just in the food. It was in the very heart of the royal court itself. With the journal story now revealed, the scattered bodies and the overturned banquet tables take on a new, chilling meaning. This wasn't a random act of madness. It was a meticulously planned act of twisted revenge. The chef, Master Theron, was not a monster without motive. He was a man who had lost everything to the cruelty of the court, and he had spent a lifetime forging a single beautiful and terrible weapon, a poisoned feast. The scattered pages of the journal, now being passed among the survivors, are the final pieces of a puzzle far more intricate and horrifying than anyone could have imagined. A mainstream historical fact, great acts of revenge, particularly in the annals of royalty, were often not about immediate violence, but about symbolism. They were a way of not just killing an enemy, but of erasing their legacy, of making their death a public humiliation. Master Theron's feast is a perfect example of this. He didn't just want to kill the Emperor. He wanted to poison everything the Emperor stood for. The feast, a symbol of royal power and abundance, was turned into a symbol of decay and death. The most powerful man in the kingdom was not killed in battle or by a swift blade, but by a meal, by the very act that was supposed to sustain and celebrate his power. You read the journal's account of the count who betrayed the herbalist. The man, the journal explains, was not just a coward. He was a willing participant in the scheme to get rid of the herbalist. He was not just following orders. He was looking for an excuse to leave the woman he loved for a more powerful alliance. His act was not just a social transgression. It was an act of personal malice, a betrayal that Master Theron never forgot and never forgave. The journal describes the count with a kind of chilling, detached fury, as if he were a scientific specimen. The count, now lying dead with his face a sickly green, was a specific target of the chef's revenge. The poison was designed to be not just fatal, but agonizing. The man's last moments were a mirror of the herbalist's. The poison, the journal reveals, was a slow-acting neurotoxin, a substance that would cause a kind of creeping paralysis while leaving the mind lucid. It was a kind of slow, terrible torture, a final, cruel act of poetic justice. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some historical accounts of revenge plots suggest that a key element was making the victim not just die, but understand why they were dying. This was a psychological form of torture, a way of ensuring that the victim's last moments were not of peace, but of a horrifying, dawning realization of their own guilt. The journal suggests Master Theron's revenge was precisely that. He wanted them to know. He wanted the Emperor to understand in his final, terrifying moments that he was dying for the crimes he had committed years ago, crimes he had long since forgotten. He wanted the Count, and the rest of the court, to understand that they were dying for their complacency, for their quiet acquiescence to the cruelties of the system. Historians still argue whether the chef's revenge was truly a grand, moral act of justice, or simply a monstrous act of personal spite disguised as a political statement. Did he truly believe he was righting a wrong, or was he a man so consumed by hatred that he would burn down an entire kingdom to get his revenge? The journal itself provides no clear answer. It is a document of a man who's both a victim and a villain. He's a man who was wronged, but his response to that wrong was a kind of complete and total annihilation. It's an act of vengeance so total that it transcends morality. The journal describes how the chef for weeks prepared the meal. He didn't just get the ingredients, he grew them. He cultivated the Solanum mortiferum himself, a final terrible act of care and attention. The sweet and floral aroma that you smelled in the sauce was not just a cover for the poison's true nature. It was an extract from a rare flower that the herbalist had once shown him, a flower that smelled like her favourite perfume. The sweet smell was a kind of ghostly memory, a fragrant reminder of the life that was stolen. The poison, you realise with a kind of sickened fascination, was not just a killer. It was a kind of tribute, a fragrant monument to a forgotten woman. The journal's final pages are a list of names, not of the people who were to be killed, but of the people who were to be spared. It's a short list, only a handful of names. A few of the older servants, a couple of the less connected nobles, a handful of foreign dignitaries. He didn't want to kill everyone. He just wanted to kill the court, the system that had taken everything from him. The fact that you are a survivor is not a matter of luck. It's a matter of choice. The chef, in his final act of control, had chosen you and a few others to live. You were a witness, not a victim. He needed a few of you to survive, to tell the story, to make sure his legacy of revenge was not lost in the chaos. The journal ends with a final chilling sentence. My revenge is not a meal, it is a story, and I leave it to the survivors to tell it. The veteran guard, who has been listening to the survivors read the journal, finally closes the book. The silence in the hall is no longer of shock but of understanding. The feast was a performance, the poison was the prop, and the story, the true story of the royal court, has finally been revealed. It's not a story of power and glory, but of betrayal, corruption, and a kind of twisted, beautiful revenge that will haunt this kingdom for 1,000 years. The chef, the peculiar silent man, has succeeded. His legacy is not in his food, but in the story of his terrible revenge, and you, my friend, are now a part of it. As the journal is passed from hand to hand, a chilling family secret begins to unravel, revealing a dark undercurrent to the Emperor's lineage. The story of the herbalist and the Count was just the surface layer. The deeper truth, the one that truly drove Master Theron's revenge, was a secret that reached back generations, a hidden stain on the royal family's history that had finally come to light in the most brutal way imaginable. A mainstream historical fact, royal families throughout history were often masters of PR. They crafted elaborate genealogies and heroic narratives to legitimize their rule, often hiding or outright erasing inconvenient truths. A scandal that might have been devastating to a common family was simply swept under the rug by a monarch with enough power and influence. The truth, however, has a way of coming out, and in this case, it came out on a night of death and destruction. You read the journal and learn that the Emperor who just died was not the first to betray Master Theron's family. The herbalist, the journal reveals, was not just a commoner. She was the great-granddaughter of a powerful alchemist who had served the Emperor's grandfather. The alchemist, a genius of his time, had been tasked with creating a medicinal potion for a crippling disease that ran in the royal bloodline, a kind of genetic weakness that manifested in terrible, debilitating seizures. The alchemist had succeeded, creating a potent elixir that would keep the disease at bay. But the Emperor's grandfather, a man of profound paranoia and greed, had not just taken the elixir, he had accused the alchemist of witchcraft, of using dark magic to create a potion that could control the royal family. The alchemist, along with his entire family, was put to death. The Emperor's grandfather, however, kept the formula, a secret he passed down to his son and then to his grandson, the Emperor who just died. The formula, you realise with a kind of sickened fascination, was the source of their power, a secret that kept a fragile bloodline from collapsing. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some ancient medical traditions, it was believed that certain elixirs and potions could only be administered by a member of the family that created them. It was a kind of genetic medicine, a kind of magical bond between the creator and the consumer. The Emperor, in his greed and paranoia, had not only stolen the elixir, he had broken the bond. The journal suggests that the Emperor's grandfather, in his short-sighted cruelty, had doomed his own family. The herbalist, a descendant of the murdered alchemist, was the last of her line. She was the key to the elixir's continued potency. The Emperor's final act of betrayal was not just a crime of passion, but an act of stunning, world-ending stupidity. He had killed the very person who could have saved his lineage. Historians still argue whether the family secret was a long-kept truth or a myth fabricated by Master Theron to give his revenge a more profound historical weight? Was the royal family truly afflicted with a generational illness, or was it a convenient narrative to justify a crime that was, at its heart, about personal spite? The answer, you realise, is both. The disease may or may not have been real, but the Emperor's fear and paranoia certainly were. The journal is a tapestry of fact and fiction, of a historical truth interwoven with a personal narrative of vengeance. The chef, in his final act, was not just killing a man, he was exposing a lie that had been at the heart of the kingdom for 100 years. You turn the page again and read the journal's description of the chef's final preparations. He didn't just concoct a poison, he designed a final, terrible culinary testament to the alchemist's legacy. The dark sauce, the one with the sweet and cloying smell, was not just an ordinary poison. It was a mirror of the elixir that the Emperor's grandfather had stolen. The elixir was a kind of anti-venom, a substance that would counter the effects of the genetic disease. The chef's poison was a kind of anti-elixir, a substance that would bring the disease to a final, terrible fruition. The sauce, you realise, was a kind of twisted, beautiful poetry. The Emperor and his court were not just poisoned. They were given a final taste of the family's hidden sickness, a final, terrible reminder of the lie they had been living for 100 years. The small wooden bird figurine that you saw on the Emperor's throne comes to mind. The journal mentions it. It was a personal symbol of the alchemist's family, a symbol of their trade and their genius. The chef, Master Theron, had left it there as a final taunt, a kind of "I told you so" to a man who was already dead. The figurine, in its silent wooden way, tells the entire story. It is a symbol of a family's legacy, a legacy that was stolen and then returned in the form of a slow-acting, delicious poison. The feast was not just a meal. It was a kind of historical reenactment, a final, terrible performance of a long-forgotten family drama. The survivors, as they read the journal, begin to understand the terrible truth. Their horror is no longer just about the dead bodies on the floor, but about the very history they were all a part of. The court, they realise, was built on a lie that was now a bloody, terrible truth. The Emperor who just died was not a god. He was just a man with a family secret, a man who, in his arrogance, had sealed the fate of his own court. The feast was the final, terrible act of a play that had been running for 100 years, a play that had finally reached its bloody conclusion. And the chef, the peculiar silent man, was the director, the set designer, and the lead actor. And the entire court, the living and the dead, were the audience. The great hall in the morning light is no longer just a room. It is a stage, a final, terrible monument to a family's hidden secret and a chef's terrible revenge. And you, a silent witness, are now a part of the audience, a survivor in a play that has just ended with a final, terrifying curtain call. The journal's revelations have turned the entire tragedy on its head. It's no longer just a story of a poisoner and his victims. It's a tale of a century-old family secret, a hidden sickness, and a long-simmering revenge. But as you and the other survivors absorb this new, horrifying reality, another question begins to form in your mind. What about the royal physician, Master Elian? He was the most knowledgeable man in the court when it came to poisons. He seemed to suspect something was wrong. So why did he do nothing? His role in the tragedy, once a simple matter of a loyal servant trying to give a warning, now seems far more complex and far more mysterious. A mainstream historical fact, a royal physician's loyalty was often a delicate and precarious thing. They owed their allegiance to the monarch, but their first duty was to their professional oath to heal and protect. What would happen when those two allegiances came into conflict? In this case, Master Elian's professional knowledge would have told him that the food was a threat, but his political loyalty would have told him to do nothing that might be perceived as a challenge to the Emperor's authority. This is a classic historical dilemma, a man trapped between his duty and his conscience. You remember the flash of alarm in his eyes when the Emperor was served the dark private liquid. You remember his attempts to speak to the Emperor, to warn him. You also remember the grim, resigned look on his face when he was silenced by the court official. He seemed to have given up, but did he? You look at him now, still standing silently by the dead Emperor, his face a perfect mask of sorrow and exhaustion. He seems like a man who has lost a terrible battle, but not a man who has been a willing participant in the destruction. He is a survivor, like you, but a survivor with a far more intimate knowledge of what happened. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some medical folklore, it was believed that physicians had the ability to sense the presence of poison through a kind of visceral reaction, a tingling in their hands or a metallic taste in their mouth. It was a kind of professional sixth sense, a psychic warning system that would tell them when they were in the presence of a deadly substance. The physician, Master Elian, had a reputation for this very thing. He would often refuse to touch a patient's food if he felt a bad aura coming from it. This morning, as you watch him, you wonder if his stillness, his quiet despair, is not just a sign of his grief, but a kind of physical reaction to the immense, overwhelming presence of death in the room. Historians still argue whether Master Elian's inaction was a calculated act of self-preservation or a kind of professional fatalism. Did he know he would not be listened to and therefore chose to save his own life? Or did he simply believe that the Emperor's arrogance was a kind of cosmic justice, a final act of hubris that he was powerless to stop? The journal, in a single, chilling paragraph, gives you the final piece of the puzzle. Master Theron and Master Elian had a history. They were not friends, but they were not enemies either. They were two men who existed on the fringes of the court, men who understood the dark undercurrents that flowed beneath the gilded surface. The journal reveals that Master Theron had met with Master Elian a few weeks before the feast. He had told him, in no uncertain terms, what he was going to do. He had not asked for his help, but he had given him a choice. He had given him the option to speak up, to warn the Emperor, to be a hero. He had also told him that the poison would only kill those who had a hand in the century-old betrayal. He had given the physician a kind of moral escape clause, a way to do nothing, and still feel that he was in the right. The journal describes Master Elian's reaction as one of profound moral anguish. He was a man who, you now understand, was trapped. If he had warned the Emperor, he would have been laughed at, dismissed, or perhaps even killed as a traitor. If he had done nothing, he would have to live with the knowledge that he could have saved lives. Master Theron's plan was not just about revenge, it was about exposing the rot at the heart of the court, a rot so deep that even the most honourable man in the kingdom was powerless to stop it. Master Elian's inaction was not a matter of cowardice, it was a matter of resignation. He was a man who saw the end coming and knew, with a kind of terrible certainty, that it was inevitable. You look at him now, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He is a living monument to the tragedy, a testament to the fact that even the most righteous of men can be broken by a system that is fundamentally corrupt. He is a man who was given a choice, and he chose to live with his inaction, a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He is not a villain, but he is not a hero either. He is a tragic figure, a man who, in his silence, spoke a terrible truth. The Emperor's death was a consequence of his arrogance. The court's death was a consequence of their complicity, and the physician's survival was a consequence of his powerlessness. The sun is now fully risen, and the light from the high windows reveals a new detail. The floor is not just covered in bodies and spilled food, it is covered in a kind of fine, shimmering dust, a substance that looks like crushed pearl. It is the same substance that you had seen on the quail from the first course. The journal in a final, terrifying entry reveals its purpose. It was not a garnish, but a final act of betrayal. The pearl dust, when mixed with the stomach's acids, was a mild toxin in itself, but it was designed to neutralize any poison detection powder, a kind of test that the royal physicians would often use to test the food. Master Theron was not just a genius. He was a man who had studied the very methods that would be used to catch him. He was a step ahead of everyone, even the most knowledgeable man in the room. Master Elian, you realize, was not just powerless, he was rendered useless, and that, you know, was the most terrible kind of revenge of all. The revelation of the family secret and the physician's foreknowledge adds layers to the tragedy, transforming it from a simple revenge plot into something far more profound and terrifying. But as you and the other survivors read the journal, a new, chilling truth comes to light. Master Theron's plot was not just about the royal family or the court, or a single act of revenge. It was about sending a wider message, a kind of historical indictment of a system that was built on a foundation of lies and cruelty. The feast was a terrible, brutal lesson for a kingdom that had long forgotten its own dark history. A mainstream historical fact. A monarch's power was often a direct reflection of their ability to control the narrative. They controlled the flow of information, the public's perception, and the historical record itself. The emperor who just died had perfected this art. His reign was seen as one of peace and prosperity, a kind of golden age. But Master Theron's journal, his final terrible act of revenge, has proven that the peace was a lie and the prosperity was built on a foundation of stolen knowledge and brutal betrayals. The feast was a kind of anti-narrative, a single, horrifying event designed to dismantle a lifetime of public relations. The poison was not just a killer. It was a kind of truth serum for a kingdom that had long been living in a state of delusion. You turn a page of the journal and read the chef's final thoughts. He writes about the golden age with a kind of bitter, detached fury. He writes about the artists who painted the emperor's heroic portraits, the poets who wrote odes to his greatness, the historians who wrote of his noble lineage. He sees them all not as artists, but as complicit liars, men who are paid to create a beautiful, false reality. His revenge, he writes, was not just on the emperor, but on the entire system of deception. He wanted to show the world that the beauty and the power of the court were nothing more than a carefully constructed facade, and that a single meal could bring the whole thing crashing down. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit from the history of political rebellion. It was said that some rebels, unable to fight a powerful enemy on a battlefield, would attack them through their symbols. They would deface statues, burn flags, and destroy the monuments that represented their power. Master Theron's feast is a kind of metaphorical attack on the symbols of the kingdom. The banquet hall, a symbol of the emperor's wealth and power, was turned into a tomb. The food, a symbol of his abundance, was turned into a weapon. The court, a symbol of his authority, was turned into a pile of dead bodies. It was an act of pure, symbolic violence, a kind of political performance art that was designed to be not just seen, but remembered. Historians still argue whether Master Theron's plot was a true political statement, or just a grandiose, self-important act of personal vengeance. Did he truly believe he was a revolutionary, or was he a man so blinded by his own grief that he saw a grand purpose in his monstrous act? The journal itself provides no clear answer. He writes about his revenge with a kind of moral certainty, a kind of unshakable belief that what he is doing is not just an act of vengeance, but a kind of justice. But he is also, you realise, a man who has lived his life in the shadows, a man who has lost everything. He's a man who sees the world not as it is, but as he believes it should be, a world where the cruel are punished and the betrayed are vindicated. The journal then mentions a few other, seemingly random acts of betrayal and cruelty by the emperor. Acts that seemed minor at the time, but which, when read in the context of the journal, take on a new, chilling significance. A peasant who was dispossessed of his land to make way for a royal hunting lodge. A small rebellion that was brutally put down. A foreign dignitary who was quietly murdered to secure a trade route. The journal lists these events not as a kind of historical record, but as evidence. Each of these events, he writes, was a testament to the emperor's character, a single, damning piece of a puzzle that would finally, in a single night, be complete. The feast was a kind of final accounting, a kind of terrible ledger that was designed to balance the scales of justice, not just for his family, but for everyone who had been wronged by the royal family for 100 years. He was not just a chef, he was a kind of historical avenger, a man who took it upon himself to deliver a final terrible judgment. The survivors, as they read the journal, are not just survivors. They are living witnesses to a historical truth that has been hidden for a century. They are the new historians, the new poets, the new bards who will tell the story of the forbidden feast that poisoned an entire royal court, a story that will not be of a great monarch, but of a man so consumed by his own arrogance and cruelty that he built his own gallows and then, in his vanity, walked to it himself. The Great Hall is no longer just a room, it is a stage, a final terrible monument to the truth, and you, my friend, are one of the few who can tell it. The journal has laid bare the conspiracy, but the final, most shocking truth is still to be revealed. The full extent of the emperor's deception. He wasn't just a man who had forgotten an old crime. He was a man who had actively and knowingly sealed his own fate and the fate of his entire court. His actions, you now understand, were a testament to a kind of profound hubris, a belief in his own invulnerability that led him to his terrible end. The feast, you realise, was not just a meal. It was a kind of a sick game of chess, and the emperor, in his arrogance, was the last piece to be taken. a mainstream historical fact. Monarchs and rulers were often so insulated from the truth that they would surround themselves with sycophants who would only tell them what they wanted to hear. They would ignore all warnings, all omens, and all signs of rebellion, believing that their power was absolute and their position unassailable. The emperor who just died was a perfect example of this. He had been warned by his own physician, by a frantic clerk, and by the subtle signs of fear in his own court, but he chose to ignore them all because he believed himself to be a god on earth, a man who could not be touched by the petty concerns of poison and betrayal. You read the journal, and the chilling truth comes to light. Master Theron did not just bring the poison to the court. He brought it to the emperor himself, a few weeks before the feast. He had disguised it as a kind of medicinal tonic, a new elixir that he claimed would cure the emperor's persistent cough. The emperor, a man so vain he would try anything to maintain his appearance of perfect health, had taken it, not knowing that he was drinking a slow-acting poison, a substance that would, in the coming weeks, weaken his body and make him susceptible to a final deadly dose. The pearl powder you saw on the quail. It was a kind of anti-venom, a substance that was supposed to protect the emperor from the poison in the food, a kind of test that the chef had devised to see if his plan was working. The emperor, you realise, was not just a victim. He was a kind of walking experiment, a man who, in his vanity, had taken a dose of his own destruction. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some ancient cultures, it was believed that a killer could mark their victim with a subtle physical sign, a kind of branding that only the victim would recognise. Master Theron's plan was a kind of psychological branding. He had given the emperor a kind of physical mark, a kind of internal clock that was ticking down to his final moment. The emperor's cough, the one that the tonic was supposed to cure, was a kind of a final terrible joke. It was a physical reminder of the poison that was already in his system, a cough that was not of sickness but of a slow, terrible and inevitable death. The emperor in his final moments was not just a man who was dying. He was a man who was being reminded in every painful breath of his own terrible folly. Historians still argue whether the emperor's final act of defiance, the toast with his private untainted wine, was a true act of hubris or a desperate attempt to show that he was still in control, even as his world was falling apart. Did he truly believe that he was immune? Or was he a man so consumed by his own image that he would rather die with a lie on his lips than live with the truth? The journal suggests the latter. The emperor, you read, knew that the food was a threat. He had his own tasters, men who would eat a small portion of every dish before he did. He trusted no one. But he had been so caught up in the drama of the court, the politics of the feast, that he had overlooked the most obvious of threats, his own cup. The sweet that he ate, the one that the clerk had tried to warn him about, was not just a piece of candy. It was the final, fatal dose, a perfect delivery system for a poison that was already in his system. The emperor, in his arrogance, had ignored the most important lesson of all, that a man who trusts no one will, in the end, have no one to trust. The final pages of the journal are a testament to the chef's meticulous attention to detail. He had not just planned the poison, he had planned the emperor's final moments. He had ensured that the emperor would die not in a quiet corner, but in the centre of his court, a public humiliation for a man who had lived his life in a public lie. He had ensured that the emperor would die not with a scream, but with a silent, terrible understanding of his own folly. The final, most shocking truth, you realise, is that the emperor's death was not just a historical event. It was a work of art, a final, terrible masterpiece from a man who was, in his own way, a kind of twisted genius. The sun is now high in the sky, and the silence in the hall is no longer of death, but of a quiet, profound understanding. The survivors are no longer just survivors. They are living witnesses to a historical truth that has been hidden for a century. They are the new historians, the new poets, the new bards who will tell the story of the forbidden feast that poisoned an entire royal court, a story that will not be of a great monarch, but of a man so consumed by his own arrogance and cruelty that he built his own gallows and then, in his vanity, walked to it himself. The Great Hall is no longer just a room. It is a stage, a final terrible monument to the truth, and you, my friend, are one of the few who can tell it. The emperor, in his deception, had sealed his own fate, and the chef, in his revenge, had given him exactly what he deserved, a final, terrible lesson in the power of the truth. The silence in the great hall is no longer that of death or shock, but of profound understanding. The journal has been read, and the horrifying truth has been laid bare for all to see. The Forbidden Feast was not just a historical event, it was a testament to the power of a single terrible act of revenge, a final, terrible legacy from a man who had lost everything. The scattered bodies on the floor are not just victims, they are the final bloody pages of a story that has just ended. The kingdom, you know, will never be the same. A mainstream historical fact. Great world-altering events, particularly those with a dramatic and public conclusion, often become a foundational myth for the society that survives them. They are not just historical events, but a kind of morality play, a story that is told and retold for generations to come. The story of the Forbidden Feast will be just that. It will be a tale whispered in taverns, a lesson taught to children, a kind of dark gospel that will remind the kingdom of the perils of arrogance, betrayal, and a kind of profound, world-ending corruption. The name of the emperor will not be spoken with reverence, but with a kind of morbid curiosity, a historical footnote to a man who in his vanity sealed his own fate. The survivors of the feast, a small and shaken group, are now the bearers of this new truth. They are the new historians, the new storytellers, the new keepers of a secret that has just been written in blood. The story of the poison, the revenge, and the family secret is not just a story. It is a kind of historical indictment, a final, terrible judgment on a royal line that had been living a lie for 100 years. The feast was a kind of a reset button, a terrible and bloody cleansing that has left a kingdom with a clean slate and a terrible, unforgettable memory. And here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some ancient cultures, it was believed that a tragedy of this magnitude could leave a kind of psychic echo on the land itself. The Great Hall, it was said, would be forever cursed, its walls holding the memory of 100 screaming voices. The gardens, where the chef had grown his final, terrible ingredients, would be forever tainted, its flowers a silent, beautiful reminder of a poison that had brought a kingdom to its knees. The people, you realise, will not just remember the feast, they will feel it. It will be in the air they breathe, the ground they walk on, the very fabric of their society. It will be a kind of terrible psychic wound that will never heal. Historians still argue whether the legacy of the Forbidden Feast was one of genuine change or a brief and bloody interlude in a history that would, in the end, simply repeat itself. Did the survivors, with their new knowledge, truly forge a better, more just society? Or did they simply fall back into the same old patterns of power and corruption? The answer, you know, is that the truth will always be somewhere in the middle. The survivors will be forever marked by what they saw. Their lives and their children's lives will be a testament to a world that was, for a single, terrible night, brought to its knees by a man with a single, beautiful, and terrible purpose. The legacy of the feast is not a simple one. It is a complex tapestry of justice and brutality, of revenge and of love, of truth and of lies. It is a story that will never ever be forgotten. The sun is now fully in the sky, and the silence in the hall is replaced by the low murmur of the survivors. They are talking not of what they saw, but of what they will do. They are making plans, not for revenge, but for a new, better world. They are the seeds of a new beginning, a new kingdom that will, you hope, be built on a foundation of truth and justice, not of lies and betrayal. The Forbidden Feast, you realise, was not just an ending. It was a beginning, a new page in a history book that has just been written, and you, my friend, are one of the few who can tell it. You are a living monument to a historical truth that has been hidden for a century. You are a new historian, a new poet, a new bard who will tell the story of the forbidden feast that poisoned an entire royal court, a story that will not be of a great monarch, but of a man so consumed by his own arrogance and cruelty that he built his own gallows, and then, in his vanity, walked to it himself. The Great Hall is no longer just a room, it is a stage, a final terrible monument to the truth, and you, my friend, are one of the few who can tell it. The story has ended, and you are awake. The horror has passed, and the world is still turning. You can hear the sounds of life outside the Great Hall, the distant rumble of a cart, the low murmur of people, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The tragedy is over, but the memory, the story, will live on, a silent whisper in the night, a cautionary tale for a new age. The air is now clean, but a faint floral scent, a ghostly memory of a poison that brought a kingdom to its knees, still seems to linger. It is the scent of a love that was lost and a revenge that was won. It is the scent of a story that will never, ever be forgotten. The night is over now and the sun is up. The story, my friend, is complete.